Greetings, everyone. My name is Ryan Bonfiglio, and I'll be leading you through this 7-part course. In it, we'll explore the significance of the biblical idea of Sabbath and how it invites us into a 1-in-7 rhythm of rest. Along the way, we'll be taking a closer look at the basic features of the Sabbath principle, especially as we find it spelled out in the Ten Commandments. We'll also reflect on how this concept is developed and applied in other parts of Scripture, and why it became such an important point of theological reflection for ancient Israel and the early church. Coupled with our explorations of Scripture, we'll be thinking together about the significance of the Sabbath for our lives of faith today. So, let's get started. I want to begin with an observation that emerges from my experience teaching about Sabbath in church settings. I've found that the idea of Sabbath is, by far, the most desperately needed, least followed principle in all of Scripture. Most of us long for time off, for a less busy life, but we struggle to receive God's invitation to orient our lives around a sustained rhythm of rest. I call this the Sabbath paradox. Now, on one side of the paradox is our exhaustion. Perhaps more than ever before, many of us are feeling fatigued and frazzled. Our schedules are packed, our agendas are overfull. On a daily basis, we find ourselves rushing from one thing to the next in a frenzy of productivity and busyness. Duties at work and responsibilities at home push and pull us in opposite directions, sometimes to the point of breaking. Many of us end up feeling like the character Sisyphus from ancient Greek mythology. Sisyphus was the king of Corinth, the same Corinth that we know from the New Testament. For his various crimes in life, Zeus punished Sisyphus in the afterlife in an especially cruel way. Sisyphus had to roll a huge boulder up a steep hill every day. It took every last ounce of his strength and every last minute of the day to accomplish the task. And then, at night, the boulder would roll all the way back down the hill. The next day, Sisyphus would have to start the process all over again. And so it went, day after day. What boulders do you push up the hill each day? Perhaps it's email or Zoom meetings, or it might be something around the house like laundry or changing diapers, dropping the kids off at school, scooping kitty litter. To keep up with these seemingly endless tasks, we feel like we have to run our lives at a breakneck pace. Dutch theologian Henry Nouwen has suggested that in recent years, the speed of our lives has become absurd. Now, by absurd, Nouwen means wildly unreasonable, which is the dictionary definition of the term. But he also has in mind the Latin root absurdus, which means out of tune or deaf. As the pace of our lives increases, Nouwen observes, we become increasingly deaf to our own emotional and spiritual health, deaf to the needs of our community, and deaf to the presence of God in our lives. A case in point is reflected in a sociological study conducted at a major American seminary. Here's how it worked. A collection of students were told that they had been chosen to lead an important seminar that was to occur in a building located across campus. 1/3 of those students were told to hurry because their seminar had already begun. Another third were told that they were on time but should not delay. And the final third were told that they had plenty of time to spare before the seminar began. Meanwhile, the researchers placed a paid actor in a nearby alley. He was dressed in dingy clothes and was told to pretend that he had a bad cough. His story was that he had a respiratory problem and was in need of help. There was no way to get from where the students were to where the seminar was held without passing right by where the man was stationed. Once the students got to the other building, there was no important seminar for them to lead. Instead, the students were asked a simple question. What did you do for the man in need? Those who were told to hurry not only did not stop to help the man, but they claimed not to have even seen him. In the second group, everyone saw the man, but no one stopped. Only students in the third group actually stopped to help the man in need. Researchers concluded As the speed of our daily lives increases, ethics becomes a luxury. I wonder if the same is true of us. Who do we tend to not see? Who do we tend to pass by simply because of the pace of our lives? Is cultivating empathy simply too inefficient? Friends, it makes me wonder, are we too busy to love our neighbor? Are we too busy to notice when God shows up in our lives? Doctors and psychologists alike are now increasingly speaking of busyness as a medical problem. They are using words like epidemic to describe the adverse effects the pace of our lives are having on our health. Studies are highlighting the connection between the pace of our lives and rising anxiety rates among teens and youth. And among adults, busyness is leading to higher than ever rates of burnout across numerous industries. Friends, the speed of our lives is taking a toll. And many of us don't just want a little bit more rest on the weekends. We long for healthier rhythms and sustainable patterns that can help us reconnect to our families, our passions, and to God. Given this, you would think that we would jump at the invitation to enter into the 1 in 7 rhythm of rest offered us in the Bible. And yet, most of us don't. This brings us to the other side of the paradox. Surveys reveal that few Christians take the Sabbath seriously, and fewer still see it as a significant part of their call to discipleship. This is striking not only because of how tired we are, but also because the Bible presents Sabbath not just as a nice idea or a suggestion. In Scripture, we are commanded to keep Sabbath. It's even one of the 10 commandments. Now, let me be clear. The Sabbath is not the only one of the 10 commandments that we struggle to follow. It turns out we're pretty good at breaking just about all of the 10 commandments. What is unique about the Sabbath commandment is that it is the only one we don't feel bad about breaking. If we were to lie or steal, most of us would be racked with guilt. But if we fail to rest, we hardly feel that we are doing something wrong. In fact, it's often the other way around. Many of us feel guilty when we do observe rest in our busy lives. This makes me think of a pastor friend of mine who, on his Sabbath, would go to the office early in the morning and turn on the lights so that people would think he was working. Then, at the end of the day, he would return and turn off the light. It was as if he didn't want to get caught keeping the commandment. The reluctance to rest despite our exhaustion is playing out across our society. Here's just one example. Did you know that of the 36 wealthiest nations in the world, the U.S. is the only one that does not mandate paid leave for employees? This in its own right reveals how little value we place on rest. But the problem doesn't stop there. Studies show that within companies that do give their employees paid vacation, very few employees actually take it. Each year in America, 768 million days of unpaid vacation go unused. It turns out we can't even be paid to rest. Now, many other examples might be cited that illustrate our struggle to rest despite the fact that we feel exhausted. For now, though, I want to return to where we began, the Sabbath paradox. What might explain the fact that we struggle to observe a biblical command that promises to give us what we so desperately desire? There are at least 3 factors at work. First, many of us have come to see Sabbath as a vestige of ancient Israelite religion, meaning it's something that the Old Testament talks about and that many Jews throughout history have practiced, but it was not meant to carry over into Christianity. This view is usually accompanied by the assumption that Jesus, somewhere along the line, overturned the Sabbath or didn't follow it himself. Or it accompanies the assumption that in order to facilitate the inclusion of Gentiles into the church, the requirement of Sabbath keeping was dropped, much like keeping kosher. Now, we will have to scrutinize these assumptions and see if they match up to the witness of the New Testament. But for now, it's enough to know that this reasoning is common, both in popular Christian circles and a good number of biblical commentaries. Second, Many of us like the idea of Sabbath, but conclude that it is just not very realistic. I encountered this viewpoint recently while teaching about the Sabbath in a congregation. After my teaching session was over, a working mom of 3 kids raised her hand and said, "All of this sounds fantastic, but I simply just don't have the time to keep Sabbath." In her mind, it was hard enough to fit everything into a 7-day week, and now it seemed like I was asking her to live out her life as a mom and an employee with one day tied behind her back. For this woman and many others like her, following the biblical idea of Sabbath was no less practical than following the biblical law that prohibited charging interest on a loan. It might have worked a long time ago, but it simply doesn't work in our world today. The third reason I think we tend to not take the Sabbath seriously is that the rules about what you can and cannot do on the Sabbath day can feel like a burden. Did you know that in the Jewish tradition, there are 39 categories of activities prohibited on the Sabbath? This includes things like tying knots, carrying a burden, and lighting a fire. These categories emerged in an agrarian setting, but now have been adapted for contemporary life. A case in point, the prohibition against lighting a fire on the Sabbath means that Jews who follow Sabbath today refrain from turning on a light switch or doing anything else that would, in effect, complete an electrical circuit. This is why in Israel today there are special Shabbat elevators that stop on every floor. You see, the problem is not that you take an elevator. The only problem is that you are not supposed to push the buttons for the floor you are going on. So, having an elevator that stops on every floor solves the problem. Following these procedures is not easy, and to be sure, it requires tremendous intentionality and planning. If we are already feeling exhausted coming into the Sabbath, these rules can feel like just another thing to have to manage, and hardly conducive for rest. These reasons are not always named explicitly, and more often than not, these assumptions are at work beneath the surface of what we believe and the decisions we make. And yet, as important as these factors might be, I think there's something else out there that plays an even bigger role in why we as Christians tend not to take the Sabbath seriously. Namely, it has to do with the messages we receive from the world around us about work and productivity. We are told constantly that the more we do, the more important we are. In our world, busyness is an indicator of our self-worth. That's why when we complain to others about how busy we are, it is both a lament and at some level a boast. We don't want to be busy, and at the same time, we want people to know we are busy because it indicates something about our importance. Here's a case in point. A few years back, the Harvard Business Review conducted a survey about perceptions of social status in America. Participants were given descriptions of 2 families that were identical in every way: geography, ethnicity, number of kids, even their income was the same. The only difference had to do with their routines around dinner. Family A would shop at Whole Foods and then go home and prepare the meal with the ingredients they purchased. Family B subscribed to Blue Apron, a meal delivery service that drops off at your home fully prepared ingredients that you then have to cook using their step-by-step instructions. So, both families were cooking dinner, but Family A got the ingredients from Whole Foods while Family B got ingredients delivered to their doorstep. After reading about each family, participants were asked which of the 2 they perceived to have a higher social status. Overwhelmingly, Family B was chosen. Why? Survey participants inferred that Family B was busier than Family A, since they had to have their groceries delivered rather than having to go shopping at Whole Foods. And busyness, in the eyes of the survey participants, was an index of social importance. The viewpoint that the Harvard Business Review study uncovers is pervasive in our society. It reflects a prevailing belief that our core value lies in our performance and production. This is why so many of us find ourselves stuck in the Sabbath paradox. We rarely take Sabbath or even rest seriously, not because we aren't tired, but because we have absorbed the messages from the world around us that our worth is tied to what and how much we do. The biblical idea of Sabbath goes against the grain of this perspective. It reminds us that we are made to be human beings, not human doers. Work matters and indeed is considered sacred in Scripture. But at the same time, our work was never intended to be without limits or to compel us to run life at a pace that leaves us out of tune with our own emotional and spiritual health and deaf to the needs of our neighbors. In this way, taking Sabbath seriously involves more than just finding better work-life balance or carving out some time for rest on the weekend. Rather, the biblical concept of Sabbath invites us into a bold, faith-filled act by which we can begin to unentangle ourselves from our preoccupation with performance and production, and free ourselves to seek and savor a rhythm of rest through which we can more fully experience the wholeheartedness God intends for all of us.